Okay. Can you hear me, everyone? Hello?
Yes, Miss, we can hear you.
Fine. I'm going to start homeostasis today. We have the last part in the coordination, which is the pupil reflex. I prefer to explain this in class. So I'm going to explain pupil reflexes, the circular and the radial muscles and the iris. I'll explain it, don't worry, in class. And today I'm going to start homeostasis. When we finish homeostasis, we will finish with the lesson coordination. Okay, I'm going to start straight away. First, I'm going to start with the definition of homeostasis. It's a very important definition. You need to understand it. And actually, homeostasis is all supplement. What you took last year in the core is the definition of homeostasis and examples. That's it. You did not take any details. All the details are due for year 10. So this is an important part. First, we need to know what is the definition of homeostasis. Now, homeostasis, the definition, I'm going to read it and break it down, don't worry. It is the maintenance of a constant internal environment within set limits. Now, what does this mean? The maintenance, if I will use simple English terms to replace these complicated terms, the maintenance means to keep. So you can translate maintenance into keep. To keep a constant internal environment. I hope this is clear. A constant internal environment, this means the environment inside your body. We want to keep everything inside your body within set limits. Within set limits means balanced. For example, body temperature should always stay at 37 degrees. Carbon dioxide levels should always be balanced or in the middle. Oxygen levels should always be balanced. Heart rate, heart pressure, water levels, everything has to be balanced. Everything has to be within set limits. Nothing is allowed to exceed the limit or to be below the limit, because if anything is not at set limits, it's going to cause disease. Okay, so all the steps that the body does in order to keep the insides of your body. Someone has noise here in the background. Please remove the noise. All the steps that the body does in order to keep everything at set limits is called homeostasis. Okay, there is noise in the background. So I'm sorry, I will have to mute you. I don't know where this noise is coming from. Give me a second. If you have a question, raise your hand. So again, I'll go back to the definition. We're starting with the definition of homeostasis. The homeostasis is all the steps that the body does to keep the body within balance, within set limits. Now, there is a definition that you have to memorize. It is the maintenance or keeping your body or the constant internal environment. Constant internal environment means simply your internal body, the body from the inside, internal body. Within set limits. Now let's read on. Internal conditions inside the body need to be kept constant and within set limits, okay, the whole time, so that the body can function. Anything that deviates from the normal, for example, body temperature too high or too low, it's going to lead to sickness and it might even lead to death. Fine. Now, these are the examples that we are going to study in detail. Body temperature, we are going to study exactly what the body does in order to keep your temperature at 37 degrees. Blood pressure is just an example. We will not take the mechanism. Water concentration and glucose concentration. We will study the glucose concentration in detail, and this is exactly what I will start with. Now, first, we want to study how does the body maintain glucose levels. In other words, glucose levels always has to be within set limits. always has to be balanced, always has to be constant. Too much glucose is the problem and very little glucose is the problem. Now, the glucose levels in the body is controlled by two hormones. Who can tell me the names of these two hormones? We already studied one of them in the lesson digestion. I can unmute you. Tell me, what is the name of the hormone that will lower the blood glucose levels? Who can give me an answer?
Insulin.
Excuse me? Yes, glucagon and insulin. Insulin and glucagon. Now, I'm going to get, I will open a page. Okay. Now, we are studying now something really important, that is supplement. We already have an idea about it, but we will take it and elaborate it in more detail. We will study the balancing of the glucose levels in the blood, glucose in the blood. First, or step number one, there are two situations where you have to understand that things need to go back to normal, either after a meal or in between meals. After a meal, immediately after a meal, what happens? Step number one is that the glucose levels will increase. It will increase above normal. Number two, this high glucose level is detected by the pancreas. By the way, it is detected by the pancreas, not the blood, not the brain. So the glucose will increase after a meal. The high glucose levels is detected by the pancreas. When the blood passes through the pancreas will detect that the glucose levels are above normal. The pancreas will respond by releasing a hormone. What is the name of this hormone?
Insulin.
Insulin, very good. So what is the function of the insulin hormone? The function of the insulin hormone is to lower the glucose levels. Now, how will the insulin do that? The insulin will do that by one of three mechanisms, or it will actually use the three mechanisms. Step number one, the insulin will go to the liver and the muscle cells, or all the cells of the body, and it will encourage the liver and the muscle cells to increase the glucose uptake so that the glucose can be used in respiration. It will go to the liver and the muscle cells and tell them, please take this excess glucose and burn it in respiration. What if you are not burning in respiration and you are lazy and sitting on the couch and you're not burning the glucose that you're eating? What will the insulin hormone do? It will go to the liver cells, activate the enzymes in the liver cells, and tell the liver, please take this excess glucose and store it. Store it as what? Glycogen.
Glycogen.
Exactly. Now we need to stop here. Why is sugar stored as glycogen and not stored as glucose?
Because
Why don't
glucose
we
is
just start?
soluble.
Glucose is soluble and very reactive.
Highly reactive.
Exactly. Glucose is very soluble in water, and it is very reactive, and it cannot remain inside the cell as glucose, or it will make the cell very concentrated. And we don't want our body cells to be concentrated with glucose. That's very dangerous. So we will convert glucose to glycogen, and we will store this glycogen in the liver cells. Now, the liver cells now have no more space. Then what will the insulin do? It will go to your skin and tell your skin, please take this excess glucose and store it as fat. That's why too much carbohydrates make us fat. Okay? This is what the insulin will do. So again, when you are asked this question, which is a very, very common question, after a meal, what happens? The glucose levels will rise. You have too much glucose in the blood. This is not accepted. The increase in the glucose levels will be detected by the pancreas. The pancreas will respond by increasing or producing the insulin hormone. And the insulin hormone is responsible for lowering the glucose levels. The insulin is going to take this action following three steps. Step number one, it will increase the glucose uptake by the body cells, by the liver and the muscle cells, and tell them, please take this excess glucose and burn it in respiration. We're not burning. It will go to the liver cells, activate enzymes in the liver, and tell the liver, please take this excess glucose and store it as glycogen, because glycogen is insoluble in water and it is not going to make the cells concentrated and it is unreactive. So we will store it as glycogen. The liver has no more space. The insulin will go to your skin and tell your skin cells, please take this excess glucose and store it as fat under the skin. Now, something else the insulin will do. The insulin is going to lower the glucagon levels. What is the glucagon? The glucagon is another hormone that does the opposite of insulin. The glucagon, its function or its responsibility is to increase the glucose levels. The glucose levels are already high. So we don't want any more glucagon because we already have very high glucose levels and we want to lower the glucose. So an increase in the insulin hormone, its function is to lower the glucose in the blood via those 3 steps, plus high insulin levels prevents the release of the glucagon hormone from the pancreas. And this is an example of homeostasis by negative feedback. You read this term many times in the syllabus and you were not sure what it meant. And I told you we will take it later. Now we need to understand it now. When I have high insulin, we have low glucagon. So we managed the level of glucagon by increasing the insulin levels. The glucagon levels lowered down. We don't want it because we already have high glucose. The glucagon will further increase the glucose. We don't want it. So we will lower the glucagon levels. And this is homeostasis. We are maintaining a constant internal body environment. We are keeping the glucose constant by negative feedback. Negative feedback here refers to the glucagon that has been lowered very much in order to return the glucose levels back to normal. Now, who is confused? Who wants me to repeat? I will repeat anyway, but we have to understand.
The negative feedback.
Of course, I will. Now, we are studying homeostasis. Homeostasis is the mechanism of maintaining a constant internal body environment within set limits. Is the definition clear? Homeostasis means I'm going to do everything to make all the body processes within set limits, normal. Now, it's just a term that we always say it in this manner. Homeostasis by negative feedback. We always say it like this. It's like how we express it. Always when you give an example about homeostasis, write it in full. Homeostasis by negative feedback. Homeostasis by negative feedback. It is just written this way. Fine, I'm going to elaborate. We will study for the first example, which is maintaining the glucose levels in the body. Glucose levels, they have to always be within set limits. It's very important. Glucose cannot be too high and glucose cannot be too low. Our glucose levels are always fluctuating because we're always eating, we stop eating, etc., etc. So there are 2 situations where either the glucose levels are very high. This is example after a meal, after you finish a meal, immediately after a meal, or in between meals. Or when you're fasting, for example, when your glucose levels are very low. When your glucose levels are very high, this high glucose is going to be detected, number 1, by the pancreas. Number 2, the pancreas will take action. The pancreas will not allow the glucose to remain high. The pancreas will lower the glucose. The pancreas will release one of 2 hormones known as the insulin hormone. This insulin hormone will do 4 things. Number 1, it will go to the body cells. Here, I mean specifically the liver and the muscle cells, and it will increase their glucose uptake. Tell them, please take this excess glucose, use it in what?
Respiration.
In respiration. Please take this excess glucose and burn it. This is too much. We are not going to burn it in respiration. It will go to the liver cells, specifically the liver cells, and activate the enzymes in the liver and tell the liver, please take this excess glucose and store it as what? Glycogen. And we have to store it as glycogen because it is insoluble in water, and glycogen is not reactive, and it will not change the water potential inside the cell. It will not make it concentrated. Okay, there is no more space in the liver. The insulin will go to the skin cells and tell the skin, please take this excess glucose and store it as fat. And unfortunately, our skin can store unlimited amount of fat. So no matter how much glucose you're eating, it will be stored. Okay? Something else that the insulin will do. So it will do 3 things. Let me number them. 1, 2, 3. Something else, insulin will prevent the release of the
Glucagon
glucagon.
hormone.
Very good, the glucagon hormone. Why is this important? Because we will study the glucagon hormone in a minute. The glucagon hormone, its responsibility, its function is to increase the glucose in the blood. Now, is this something that we want? Do we want to increase the glucose further? It is already high. I don't want the glucose to increase. I'm doing my best to lower the glucose. So we will lower the levels of the glucagon hormone to prevent the increase or to prevent the further increase in glucose. And this is an example of homeostasis by negative feedback. Why did they call it negative feedback? Because we are here maintaining homeostasis by preventing the release of another hormone, which is the glucagon. So they called it homeostasis by negative feedback. Is this clear? Very, very good. Now, what happens in between meals? When you are hungry, in between meals. When you're hungry, when you're fasting in Ramadan, you did not eat for a long time, for several hours. So what happens to the glucose levels? The glucose levels will drop, it will fall.
Increase it in the blood.
Okay, I have low glucose levels. The low glucose level will be detected by the pancreas. The pancreas will respond by releasing the other hormone, which is the glucagon hormone. The glucagon hormone does a lot of things in order to increase the glucose levels. You are only requested to know one of those things. It will go to the liver. It will activate the enzymes in the liver, and it will tell the liver, please give me the stored what?
Glycogen.
Very good, stored glycogen, and I will convert to glucose. And this glucose will be released into the blood to return the glucose levels back to normal. Okay, something else, the glucose prevents the release of insulin. So do you see, one hormone is high levels, it prevents the release of the other hormone. That's why it is called homeostasis by negative feedback, because we don't want insulin. Insulin, it will lower the glucose levels, and the glucose is already very low. I don't want any lowering of the glucose to happen. So the glucagon will take two actions. Action number one, it will go to the liver and tell the liver, please give me the stored glycogen, because we need to convert it back to glucose and release it into the blood. Step number two, the glucagon hormone will prevent further release of insulin, will prevent the release of insulin. I don't want any insulin now. The glucose is already very, very low. Less than that, it will be fatal. So this is also another example of what homeostasis by negative feedback. It's always written this way, homeostasis by negative feedback. Now, is the glucose management clear? Okay, I'm happy that it's nice and clear. Good. So this is one of the examples of homeostasis that you need to know in detail. Let me use my PowerPoint so I don't rush. So let's take it step by step, because understanding is key for you to study anything. Homeostasis, number one, the definition is very important. Number two, the blood glucose concentration. I think now it's clear. It's controlled by the pancreas and the liver. There is a nice essay question in paper 4 that asks you, explain how the pancreas and the liver work together to control glucose levels. When you are asked this question, please divide your answer nicely into these two sections: high glucose levels or slash after a meal, and in between meals. And mention, you can write sentence by sentence. After glucose detected by the pancreas will release insulin. The insulin will do the following steps in order to lower the glucose levels. Some of you complained and told me we don't know exactly what to write in paper 4. When I tried to help, I discovered one thing, that they are too lazy to go and open their notes in order to find the answer. The answer is written in either year 9 notes or year 10 notes, but you're just too lazy to look around for it. So I don't know what else I can do for you. Now, we'll discuss this later, but let me see. Okay, now this is exactly what we explained. We already finished it. After a meal, glucose increases, detected by the pancreas, okay? And then this pancreas will release the insulin, and we said it, etc., etc., etc. Hormonal regulation. Sometimes they will ask you, what is negative feedback? Now, I gave you examples here in your notes. Negative feedback occurs when conditions in the body change from the normal set point, and action is done to return conditions back to this set point. Set point means back to normal. Set point is the term that they use in your syllabus, so you need to use it. In other words, conditions will deviate, will move away from the normal, will move away from the set point, and we have to return it back. Now, negative and positive feedback, these are the examples that will help you. The brain detects how much of a particular hormone is present in the blood. If too much of a particular hormone is found in the blood, the production of this hormone will be stopped. This is negative feedback. And if too little of a particular hormone is found in the blood, more of this hormone is produced. It is positive feedback. Okay, so what is negative and what is positive feedback? Negative feedback means when we stop the release of a particular hormone. Positive feedback means when we produce more of a particular hormone. They will not ask you what are those definitions, but you are expected to mention homeostasis with negative feedback the whole time. This is how it is expressed. All the examples we will study are examples of homeostasis by negative feedback. Okay. They can ask you this question: what is the importance of negative feedback? To maintain homeostasis, to return the conditions back to a particular set point. Fine. Now, also in your syllabus, you need to know diabetes type 1 and specifically type 1. Diabetes, number 1, is an autoimmune disease. Can someone remind me what is an autoimmune disease?
It's when the body attacks its own immune system.
When the immune system attacks self or non-self antigens.
Self-antigen.
Send self-antigens. Someone told me when your body attacks your own immune system. No, this is an incorrect answer. When your immune system attacks self-antigens, attacks your own body cells. Now, diabetes, it is of two types: diabetes type 1 and diabetes type 2. I'm not going to discuss diabetes type 2 because it is not in the syllabus and I will not waste time on it. The only type of diabetes that you are requested to know is diabetes type 1. This is the diabetes that happens in young people. It appears below the age of 20 years. Okay, now what happens in normal situations, we have to understand so that we know what happens in diabetes. Okay, this is a nice picture that shows you a body cell here. This is a body cell. Fine. And you have protein carriers, or you have doors, channels in the cell membrane. Let me draw it for you. This is a body cell. And next to it, you have a blood vessel. Again, this is the body cell. Next to it, you have a blood vessel. This is you. Okay. Of course, you're much nicer than that. And you just ate after a meal. What happens after a meal? You have lots of glucose in the blood. This glucose will be digested. It will be absorbed by the small intestine, and your blood will be filled with glucose. So all this is glucose. Your blood contains lots of glucose, but inside your cell, there is no glucose. The glucose should not remain in the bloodstream. We want the glucose to enter inside the body cell. When the glucose enters inside the body cell and becomes part of the cell, this is called what? Who will remind me?
Assimilation.
Very good, assimilation. Now, how does the glucose enter your body cell? This is the question. High glucose levels is detected by the pancreas, not the brain, by the way. It has been proved that it is detected by the pancreas, not the brain. The pancreas will release a hormone. What's the name of this hormone?
Insulin.
Insulin. This insulin will bind with complementary receptors that are found on the surface of the cell membrane. When the insulin hormone binds with the complementary receptors, the cell will open glucose channels. These are glucose channels. Glucose channels are simply doors that allow the entrance of glucose. When these glucose channels are open, the glucose will be able to move out of the blood and enter the cell. The glucose will enter the cell. It will be used in respiration. It will be used for mitosis. It will be used for cell division. It will be used for anything else. This is not our problem. This is now assimilation. And this happens in healthy people. You have a pancreas that is functioning properly and it is producing insulin. The insulin is produced. It will bind with a complementary receptor. When the insulin binds with its complementary receptor successfully, the glucose channels will open. They will allow the entrance of glucose. This is what's happening in this picture. Let's notice this picture. This is the insulin. See, it will bind with its receptor. See, when the insulin successfully binds with its complementary receptor, the glucose channel will open. Only when the glucose channels open will the glucose enter the cell and the cell can use it. Please pay attention to this moving picture. This is the blood. After a meal, you have lots of glucose in your blood. The glucose are the white
Doctor.
molecules, these white molecules. Yes.
The picture is not clear. The picture is not there.
Why is it not shared?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Give me a second. Okay, is now the screen shared? Can you see the moving picture now? Can you see the moving picture, girls?
No, miss.
No.
This is very strange. Your screen share is loading. Oh, okay. I have something with the internet, I guess. Okay, can you see my screen now?
No.
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 Yes, I think there's a problem with your connection because it's still loading.
Hmm. Oh, this is not good. Yes, the connection is very weak. Okay, give me a second. Is it still not shared?
Still.
No.
Okay, is it still not shared?
Still no.
Okay, stay with me. I'm going to try to change the connection. Okay, I'm going to disconnect and connect again. Fine, so I'm going to disconnect and connect again. I will continue. I'm not going anywhere. So 5 minutes and stay online with me. I will disconnect and I'll connect again.
Yes, it's shared.
It's
I
shared
can
now?
see it
Good.
now.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Now, so I'm not disconnecting. Stay with me. Okay, now this is important. Yes. Can you see now the moving picture?
Yes.
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 Good. Now,
Yes.
we need to understand the mechanics of diabetes so we know what's going on. So as you can see, this is the body cell, and we have here the blood after a meal. We have lots of glucose in the blood. These white molecules are the glucose. Now, for the glucose to enter the cell, this glucose channel has to open first. It will only open when the insulin hormone binds with a complementary receptor. So the high glucose levels will be detected by the pancreas. The pancreas will release insulin. This hormone is complementary to particular receptors that is found on the cell membrane of the cell. Once the insulin hormone successfully binds to the receptors, only then will the glucose channels open and allow the entrance of the glucose inside the cell. And here we are discussing the mechanics in a normal healthy person that has no diabetes. Someone that has type 1 diabetes does not have a functioning pancreas. Unfortunately, the pancreas will be attacked by the immune system, and the pancreas will not produce insulin. So there is no insulin, and this hormone will not bind with the receptor, and this glucose channel will remain always closed. Here, again, another
Prevent
picture. This
assimilation.
is not moving. Excuse me?
Preventing assimilation.
Exactly, preventing the entrance of the glucose into the cell. So insulin here is not going to be produced because I have a pancreas that is attacked by the immune system. The pancreas is not working. No pancreas, so no glucose. So the glucose will not bind to its complementary receptor. So this glucose transporter or this glucose channel will not open. So the glucose will not enter inside the cell. And the situation looks exactly like this. I have a cell that has no glucose, and I have a bloodstream that is filled with glucose, 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 glucose. There is very high glucose levels in the blood and not very low, no glucose inside the cell. The glucose does not enter from the bloodstream into the cell. Just like your friend said, no assimilation. Now, this is a very dangerous situation. Here, this is the case of diabetes. You have diabetes. Okay. Now, what are the signs and symptoms? We need to understand the signs and symptoms of a diabetic person. What does he suffer from? Number one, he is always hungry, even if he is eating the whole time. No matter how much you are eating, the glucose will never enter inside the cell. So the cell is hungry for glucose. That is why a diabetic patient is always eating. Number two, a diabetic patient is always thirsty, because the blood is very concentrated with glucose, and the blood or the body is trying to dilute this glucose by asking you to drink more and more water. We want water to try to dilute this concentrated blood. So you're always thirsty. No matter how much food you eat, you're hungry. No matter how much water you're drinking, you're still thirsty. Number three, a diabetic person is always going to the bathroom. Frequent urination. Why is that? Because this glucose is not absorbed into the cell, and we want to get rid of it. So the body will get rid of it through the urine. It will not be absorbed by the kidneys back into the body. We will study the kidneys the next lesson. We want to get rid of this excess glucose. We will dilute it. Dilute it with water. We will dissolve it with water that you're drinking, and all this will come out in the urine to try to lower the glucose levels. That's why a diabetic patient is always urinating. He is always thirsty. He is always hungry, because even though he's eating a lot, all this food does not enter inside his cells. Yes, Iman?
Yes, I don't understand why they're always thirsty. أنا فهمت hungry but not thirsty.
Because the blood is very concentrated. How can I dilute this concentration?
Are drinking water.
Yes, the brain will send signals to ask you to drink more water, to try to dilute this high concentration of sugars in the blood. So you're always thirsty, trying to dilute all this glucose. And the glucose will dissolve in the water that you're drinking and come out in the urine.
Okay, thank you, Miss.
You're welcome. Okay, so diabetic patients also have a lot of signs and symptoms depending on the severity of the diabetes. Diabetic patients, unfortunately, they cannot heal their wounds because the glucose in the bloodstream destroys their circulation and destroys their nervous sensation. I don't want to go into details, but people that are diabetic, when they're wounded, they don't heal properly. That's why they have to be careful when they are wounded. I don't know if you heard about the diabetic foot or not, but this is not our problem. Now, you are not going to be requested to ask for their signs and symptoms, but there was a question that asks you, suggest what are the signs and symptoms of a diabetic patient. Also, a diabetic patient also has very little energy, no energy, because the glucose does not enter into the cell. Now, what is the treatment of diabetes type 1? Can you guess? The treatment is very easy. What's
Give
the
them
treatment
insulin.
for diabetes type 1? Excuse me?
Taking insulin.
Injection.
Injections without
Course. Number
insulin.
1, insulin injections. Where am I? I don't want to jump. Yes, here, diabetes type 1. This is important. This is year 10. It has other names. Insulin-dependent diabetes or juvenile diabetes. Juvenile means young age because it appears below 20 years. It's an autoimmune disease. These are important information. You have a defective pancreas. The autoimmune system will attack your pancreas for no reason. These are the symptoms. And I'm not telling you to study all those 10 symptoms. The easy ones, you're always hungry, you're always thirsty, you're always going to the bathroom, you're very weak because the cells have no glucose, you're losing weight because the body is breaking down proteins and fats for energy. You're not healing properly because the high glucose levels is destroying your circulation. And the rest are not important. Treatment is important. It is clearly stated in the syllabus. You need to know the treatment for diabetes type 1. Number 1, these people, they have to take insulin injections every day. Every day. Why? Because their pancreas does not produce insulin. Number 2, they have to be very careful what they're eating. They have to be very careful that they're not eating lots of sugar because they cannot process all this sugar. They have to follow a healthy lifestyle, whether they like it or they don't. If they're overweight, they have to lose weight. They have to reduce their carbohydrate intake. And number 5, if all this is not working, they will need to do a pancreatic organ transplant. Of course, they need to find a donor first, and they need to match this donor and then do the surgery. And this can be a life-saving surgery. Type 2 diabetes, I will not discuss it because it's not in your syllabus. It has been removed. Okay? Is diabetes clear? So we discussed two objectives today. We discussed the maintenance of the glucose levels in the blood, the insulin and the glucagon. These are examples of homeostasis by negative feedback. And we discussed diabetes. Enough? Or let's take the skin.
Enough.
No, it's not enough. Let's take the skin. The skin is very easy. I'm going to draw it. I'll introduce it. Okay, I promise. I will introduce it and let it go and let you go. Why are we going to study the skin? Because the skin is the largest organ in the body that helps to maintain the body temperature. And of course, maintaining the body temperature at 37 degrees is a typical example of homeostasis. Fine, here no hormones are involved, so we just say it's homeostasis. Now the body temperature, first we will ask ourselves, why does it have to stay at 37? A very low body temperature, lower than 37, what will happen to our enzymes?
It would be
Slow down.
Someone said denatured. No, of course not. Low body temperature means our enzymes will slow down. And our enzymes cannot slow down because they catalyze very important reactions that cannot happen slowly. They are very important to sustain life, like respiration. The brain cells will not wait for glucose. If the brain does not have glucose within a certain number of seconds, I'll search it out for you to make sure, the brain cells will die. So our enzymes cannot slow down. It's fatal. Number 2, our enzymes cannot survive in a temperature above 37 for too long. For example, 40 or 41 degrees Celsius. You are rushed to the hospital because the enzymes will denature. Not only is the body in temperature important for the health of the enzymes, we have lots of proteins in our body, and proteins are destroyed by high temperature, like the cell membrane, like many hormones are made up of proteins, like the